Just a few weeks before she died in 2012, Chiara Crabella Petrillo, a servant of God in the church, on her way to sainthood, wrote a letter to her son for his first birthday so that he would have something to remember her by, and so that she could explain life's lessons to him. And in this letter, Chiara said the following. She said, "The goal of our life is to love and to be loved, always ready to learn how to love others as only God can teach you. Love consumes you, but it is beautiful to die consumed. Anything that you do in life will make sense only if you look at it in view of eternal life." This quote from Chiara describes the point of vocation: to give ourselves in love, to be consumed by love. Vocation is a heroic call to serve God with everything we have, to love God with all our heart, mind, and soul, and then to love our neighbors in the world through the way God calls us. Today, our diocese celebrates Priesthood Sunday, where we thank God for the gift of priesthood, pray for our priests, and encourage all people to listen to God's call, especially young men to discern if God might be calling them to the priesthood. Each vocation is precisely about pouring ourselves out in love of God and love of neighbor. The particular vocations, marriage, priesthood, religious life, consecrated single life, are all ways that God calls us to live out the vocation to love. Each of us are called to it, called to live a life of this love that Jesus Christ models for us. In today's gospel, we hear a vocation story, that of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, a man who was lost in his own greed and selfishness, stealing from and cheating from his fellow brothers and sisters, climbs a tree to observe Jesus. And as Jesus passes by, he calls to Zacchaeus and says that he is going to stay at his house today. And over the course of this encounter, we heard that Zacchaeus is converted. He amends his life, begins to live a life of holiness, and returns to making amends for the wrong he had done, all because he was called and encountered Christ. Zacchaeus heard the call of God and acted on it. And that's our task. Each of us are called to hear God's call and act on it, to act on the plan he has for us. God calls each of us to a life of vocation, a life of radical love. It is only in this giving of ourselves to love through vocation that our life will reach its fulfillment, that our purpose in life will be complete, that we will become saints that we're all called to be. In my own life, listening to God's call has led me here to the Diaconate, and hopefully in a few months, next May, if God and the bishop of the diocese call, to the priesthood. I remember my own vocation story, thinking back to junior high and maybe freshman year of high school, feeling for the first time a potential calling. It was as if the Lord was speaking to me personally and inviting me to follow him. And at first I was filled with this great excitement, this great passion, spending all my time researching what it might mean to be a priest, praying to the Lord to lead me if this is what was his calling. Well, then as sophomore and junior year went by, I noticed an interest, a desire in marriage. I had a few relationships with a couple of high school girlfriends and thought that maybe I would want to be married and have a wife and children in the future. I became involved with sports and other activities, had other interests, hopes, and dreams that tugged at my heart and pulled me away from the call to the priesthood. I sort of pushed it away. I didn't want to hear that God might be calling me to this different path. And it was only when I realized towards the end of junior year, senior year of high school, that the call was not going away, that I gained the courage to ask a high school friend if she thought it would be strange if I became a priest. And her response was, no, I think it would be great to say that I knew someone who became a priest. Looking back, her response was not anything super profound or dynamic, but at that time, it gave me the needed encouragement to realize that the Lord provides if he is calling. I realized that people still needed priesthood. People still loved their priests, that the world needs the priesthood, and what priests witness to in giving us Jesus Christ in the sacraments, being the example of Jesus Christ for us. And I felt as if through her voice, God spoke to me and assured me that if I trust him, he will provide. He will fulfill me. And so God speaks to all of us too. And each of us are called to explore God's particular call for us, to listen to his voice. And to do this, we need to actively listen, taking time for silence and prayer, allowing God to stir our hearts. We all long to be heroic, and God will make us so if we allow him to inflame us with passion to serve him and to serve our world, to serve our brothers and sisters in the church. And our lives will only make sense when lived in unity with God's calling. Our lives only make sense when we follow God's best interest, because he has our best interest in mind and desires that each of us work to build his kingdom. If God is everything that the church proclaims he is, then our lives will only reach fulfillment if we become saints. And so, if we all commit to following the Lord, to taking time to prayer and allowing the Lord to transform us in our particular vocations, we will once again build a culture of vocation in our parish, our diocese, and our church, and throughout the world. And to help live out this culture of vocation, I want to encourage three things. First, prayer. Pray for your priests that they might be holy and good shepherds. And pray also that all young people would listen to the voice of God and his plan for their lives, and that young men especially would be open to answering the heroic call to the priesthood. Second, encourage any young people you know, children, nieces and nephews, friends, to discern God's calling. Your encouragement could be the voice a young man needs to spark a call or confirm a calling that he has felt. You could be the encouragement a young woman needs to explore religious life, or be that encouragement of a newly married couple during their first years of marriage, helping them to live their vocation in holiness. And third, all young people, please discern and be open to God's call. If you follow God, you will not be disappointed. If you are a single man, especially consider that God might be calling you to consider the priesthood, to lay down your life in service of God and the church, to conform your life radically to Jesus Christ. Returning to that initial quote from Chiara, she said, "Love consumes you, but it is beautiful to die consumed." The question for all of us is, will we give ourselves totally over to God and our vocations in love, building God's kingdom among us? Will we put God first, our vocations first, living that vocation to love in each of our lives? And if we give ourselves to our vocations, if we discern God's calling and live the vocation he has for us, it will consume us, as Chiara says. We will die. Ourselves will be put to death, the selfishness that exists within us. But, like Jesus' crucifixion, we will experience God's grace and resurrection, which transforms us into saints and gives us the peace and fulfillment that can only come from saying yes to God.